we build trust really by honesty and humility, and knowing that we may lose a customer in the short term by being honest. But we always aim to play the long game, and we know they'll be back. And that's panned out over and over again. Companies that play the short game, the short win, the big check up front, some people choose to do that. We don't. I choose the long game, and the long game is built on trust.
Great advice from a great thinker. Adam Rosh is a medical doctor turned entrepreneur. His company, Rosh Review, serves more than 100,000 individuals who are training to become medical professionals. We'll learn about Adam's decision to go from doctor to businessman, which started with the idea to simply provide a better way of doing something. Episode 37 of Power Forward with Adam Rosh starts right now.
This is Power Forward. The primary purpose of this podcast series is to inform, entertain, and educate. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast series do not constitute legal or other professional advice, opinions, or endorsements of any kind.
All right, welcome back to Power Forward. Justin White alongside Mateen Cleaves. Mateen, how you doing, my friend?
Justin, I am flying high, soaring, baby. It's all good.
Well, you said it, my man. And, we've been very fortunate to have a lot of great minds join us on the podcast. People from different businesses, entrepreneurs, really just some great thinkers. But today we are breaking new ground, Mateen, because today, for the first time on Power Forward, we are pleased to welcome a physician. Someone with a medical degree. Yes, but that's not all. He is a physician turned very successful entrepreneur. So can't wait to hear more about his story as we welcome in Adam Rosh, who is the founder of Rosh Review. Adam, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey guys, really great. Mateen, Justin, thanks for inviting me, and couldn't be happier to be here with you.
Well, just for starters, tell our audience a little bit about you, because, I told them you're a doctor, but you also have this business now. So kind of give them some background on you and how you've gotten to where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. I try and keep it simple. I try and be a modest person here. I think for the sake of this question, I'll dive in a little more than usual. My background is I grew up out east in New Jersey, and sports were my life. It's all I ever thought about. School was pretty much secondary. What I wanted to do in my life was become a pro baseball player, and so everything revolved around that. And I didn't become a pro baseball player. And when I got to undergraduate college, I didn't really know how to learn either. And my grades were suffering at the time. I wasn't, I had the abilities of, high school was relatively easy. But once you get into an environment that is more challenging and higher expectations, your weaknesses will come out. And mine came out in that environment. And I struggled for a while. And, it was kind of really maturing and thinking about what I wanted out of life, where I had a major transition, a major moment in my life where I realized that if I was ever going to kind of make something of myself and become independent, I would have to do it through education. And so books became my go-to. And, there's a lot of obviously mostly differences between the story I'm about to tell you than similarities, but there's an important similarity in that one of the most pivotal events in my life was I was wandering around in college. I hadn't read a book cover to cover in my life. And at this moment, I was walking and I was by a used bookstore and I picked up the autobiography of Malcolm X by Alex Haley. And for some reason, I started reading it. and I ended up reading it cover to cover. And what I realized when I read that is, while, Malcolm and myself have very different backgrounds and challenges in life, if he was able to get through the challenges that he got through and learn and made education and books the center, the core of his life, then I could do it. And he inspired me. And from that point on, education became the center of my life. I ended up going to medical school, residency training, and ultimately founded the business Rosh Review.
Wow, man. Wow. That man, that's very inspiring. And it's funny because I remember, athlete as well, athletic background. And I broke my back right before I went to Michigan State. And my freshman year, it was kind of like, I don't know if I'm ever going to be the player I was. Heck, I don't even know if I'm going to play again. And then I started to take school. It made it important to me. I took it seriously. And, fortunately and unfortunately for me, my back got healthy. I started having success in sports, and then I kind of, leveled back out somewhat. But it took that moment to make me realize that, school is important. And even when I finished sports, it's like when you finish, you're still so young, man. You got so much life to live, and you're going to have to fall back on your education. So I'm glad you hit on that, and I think it's very important. But let me take you back a little bit, because you talked about, your ambition was to be a professional athlete. I want to go back to that moment when you kind of realized that wasn't a thing anymore, and you had to make that transition. How was that for you?
I think for a lot of people, sports teaches us so much more, right, than just the winning and losing of the sport and becoming an athlete. It teaches us, and we know a lot of these things, but they're so important, right? It teaches us teamwork. It teaches us competition. It teaches us to try and strive to do things that we don't think we can do or think is possible, and to actually achieve those things. So everything that I learned in sports, I actually attribute to lots of the ascribed successes that I've had later in life. The moment I realized that I was not going to continue my sports career was probably the first biggest kind of realization in my life. And I was still a little immature to understand what was happening at that time. And to be honest with you, I didn't really digest it for years later. I mean, after I went from playing sports every day to university, where I chose not to play sports, right? I did what a lot of, I ended up not going to classes, drinking probably a little too much, and having a good time. And that's the way I dealt with the emptiness in my life. And if I were to kind of think back and analyze it, books and education filled that emptiness and now gave me a purpose and something the same way I would achieve to, right? You want to work out, you want to be first place or achieve some feat in sports. Now the feat that I put in front of me was actually getting into medical school, because I had a 2.1 cumulative GPA after my second year of university. Now, going into medical school from that stage is very challenging, but I made it kind of my goal. And the same things, I actually would physically train, right, to do well on exams. I used to exercise because I used those same tactics that I would use for sports for my education and academics. So it's transferable. All of those skills are transferable.
It's something we hear all the time, Adam, from different guests we've had on the show, who used to play sports, whether it was, whether their athletic career ended in high school or whether they, went on to play big time, college athletics, and then eventually became pro athletes and then transitioned to something else. Almost always, people will say that you take the skills you learn playing sports and then apply them to the business world. But I want to go back to the point you made about education, because just listening to you talk about how much education means to you, on a personal level, it makes perfect sense to think about why you did what you did in going from becoming an emergency room physician to opening your own business. However, I think a lot of people listening to this would say, hold on, this guy went to college, he went to med school, he did his residency, he passes all these tests that you got to do, to become a doctor, and then he decides to become an entrepreneur. So kind of walk us through that process and why you decided to transition from, being a practicing physician to opening that Rosh Review.
Yeah, I didn't set out to start a business when I started Rosh Review. So being a physician, being an emergency medicine physician really encompasses, there's multiple roles. And in my life, what I chose was to be a clinician and care for patients, but also to be an educator, right? So you could be on the academic side in medicine. And so that's what I chose. I was an assistant professor and a program director, actually here in Michigan at Detroit Receiving Hospital. And I did that for many years. And when I first set out to build Rosh Review, the genesis of kind of the idea of doing all of that also stemmed from past years of my life. In medical school, for example, there would be in the library, you could check out all the old exams to study for the upcoming exams. And you'd have to check them out one at a time. And sometimes you'd go to the library and one wouldn't be available and it would just disrupt your study schedule. So I said, there's got to be a better way to do this. And I ended up I waited at the library all day and I checked out every single exam. And then I went across town to Princeton University. I probably shouldn't say this, but it's been a long time. She was a secretary at Princeton University. And I went into her office after hours and photocopied every old exam. I bound those exams into a single booklet. I came back at 8 a.m. I'd done an all-nighter, and I pitched a table, and I sold them for $5 less than one of the other organizations. And I made them into a really nice packet for people. And so I would say it was like, when you think about what was that, right? That was a problem. And I saw it as a problem, and I realized that there's a solution, a better way to do something, and you could make money from it, right? And so I put those two things together. Now, when I was in academics in emergency medicine, what I saw was there was a way to teach better. There was a way to help trainees and students engage with the material in a better way. And so I set out simply to in academics, we do things for free all the time. So I set out to build something that was going to be better than what was available, and help people really manage a very challenging time in their life, which is preparation for their certification, licensing, and board exams. And I did it. And when I realized if we want this thing to keep growing, it's going to need to have a cost to it, a fee. And so we started charging a fee. But what started as something so small has broadened out into really one of the most popular educational software products in graduate medical education training in the country.
And you were telling that story, and I'm sitting there cracking up. And Si said he broke into the secretary office and made copies. But go ahead.
I got to say this. I did it once, got away with it. Did it twice. I was actually, surprisingly, at Princeton, I ran into a couple of the janitors there. They had no problem with it. But what happened was, back in my school and back in my medical school, I got called into my dean's office. And the first time the dean said, this is a great line. My friends and I joke about this all the time. So I'm sitting in the dean's office and he says, Adam, if you want to be a doctor, and he has a New Jersey accent. He says, Adam, if you want to be a doctor, be a doctor. If you want to be an entrepreneur, be an entrepreneur. And, I looked at him and I was like, well, why can't you be both?
Right.
Why couldn't you be both? Well, I ended up really going right up to that line in school without them having to suspend me, believe it or not, simply because in the end, what I realized is I was undercutting a student organization that was using these as funding for a student organization. So I had no problem with that, right? Well, I wanted everyone to be happy. So I stopped doing it. I did it for 2 years.
It's a great story.
Yeah,
great story.
Kudos to you. But what comes to my mind when you were telling that story and, you're taking a chance like that. My older brother used to always tell me, chances make champions, man. Chances make champions. And sometimes you just got to go for it. And my question to you is like, some people might say, man, what are you doing? You got a good thing going. You got a nice setup. You're a physician. You got a nice income coming in. What are you going to try and go and be an entrepreneur? Why would you do that? Was there anyone that tried to talk you out of taking it to the next level and being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, there's so chances, make champions. I love that line. It's very true, right? We get so comfortable kind of in our status quo. And it's not until you put some constraints on things or until you take chances that where the magic happens, right? The magic happens outside of your comfort zone. And I have a saying in that, or a theory, an idea in that whenever I feel pain or whenever someone feels pain, and that doesn't necessarily mean physical pain, there's a mental pain, that's actually where you should point your eyes to. That's where you should go to. Your compass should be towards that, right? Because that's where the growth is. And it's the areas in life that I always, like the most painful thing for me was writing an essay or writing was so challenging to me. So I spent years developing my vocabulary, improving my grammar, and just writing. And I married someone who's a writer who helped me tremendously. So
smart.
I'm grateful for that. That's right. So people are always right. That's what people do often. There's always going to be a segment that tell you don't do it. My own parents would tell me, not to do it. Because, and in this case, right, you spend 26 years of school, $200,000 of that was just my medical student loan. I had undergrad loans too. And you set it aside, but I'll be honest, like you can do both still, right? So I still practice emergency medicine. I still care for patients, and I'm able to develop hobbies and businesses on the side. And even when Rosh Review is over, and one day I'm sure it will be, I'm still going to be involved in education and perhaps in another business as well. But I think when you have people who tell you, no, don't do it, you have to pause and you have to say, okay, if it's someone who has been through the grind before or has a lot of experience, you need to listen to that. And you need to really ask yourself, how bad do I want to do what I want to do? And sometimes people are right. Like you shouldn't do some things, but I always set things up so that if you fail high, right? Mm-hmm. In that even if this was a failure for me, I was going to learn some basic computer programming. I was going to learn basic business skills. I was going to learn how to manage a small team. And even if I failed, I would have that skill set to move on to the next thing. So I was all right with that. And I did a lot of fear setting exercises. So, I had to step down from my role as program director. now is a big deal, right? That's something you work your entire career to do. And I stepped down. And I essentially said, well, what happens if I step down? Like, what's the worst thing that could happen? And Rosh Review fails or something like that. And it's, fine. So maybe I'm not a program director again in the near term, but I could still get involved in resident education. Like, that's not going to be, there's no barriers to that. I'll still be able to do that. So you go through fear setting exercises, and that's really how I got from, really taking the leap and being confident in the decision I was making.
Well, the gamble certainly paid off, Adam, because you look at what Rosh Review has done, and correct me if I'm wrong here, serving more than 100,000 individuals at more than 500 schools and universities nationwide, and providing them that educational content and the technology and the analytics tools to help them with their exams and the training that's required to get them to becoming physicians. So safe to say it's worked out very well for you. But one thing I want to circle back to is a point you made earlier about identifying a need, identifying an area that you could make better. And I want you to speak to our listeners out there, who are maybe thinking of becoming entrepreneurs, starting their own business. And some people think, they got to reinvent the wheel, come up with something brand new, some amazing idea that's never been thought of before. You told me something in our previous conversation, and I love this. You said you love doing things better, not necessarily doing them from scratch. So what is your advice to other people out there who may be thinking of going into business for themselves, but they think they got to come up with the next great idea that's never been done?
People have been saying for thousands of years that everything that could be discovered has been discovered, right? And we should learn from that is absolutely not the case. Steve Jobs didn't invent the computer. He didn't invent the iPod, right? He took devices that were similar and made them better. And even artists who go from movement, right? When movements change, it's just that they take components of different art and put them together. It's the same with music as well, right? Yeah. I mean, modern rock and roll, right, was built off the backs of people who were doing blues so I think the idea of an entrepreneur is frightening to people because they walk around and they say, man, I can't come up with this next great idea. That's not what, some people have the ability to do that, right? But if you just look around, let me say this, right? I remember I also got involved in real estate investment, and the thing that really sparked that in me was I was walking around one day and I was reading a book, and in that book it says, as you walk around, every single building that you look at, every home that you see is owned by someone, right? Every building. I was in New York at the time. Every building is owned by someone. And that means that someone said one day, I'm going to go out and buy that building. And they did it, and years go by. So when you're walking around, you could just ask yourself, when you're doing your day-to-day job, or you're with your family at your house, you just ask yourself, how can you do something better than the way that you're told to do it, right? Just because you're told to do something, just because the expectation is a certain way, don't let that limit us, right? We could do it better.
Wow, man. And I look at motivational speaking kind of in that same sense. You got a lot of great motivational speakers, but think about it. They're saying the same thing. It's just about, everybody, be great, overcome adversity. I mean, everybody's saying the same thing. It's just certain people got different deliveries or the setups or how, some people got music. Right. I mean, they just got different deliveries with it. But the question I want to ask you, because, you have ventured out and your business has grown so much, and you look at, all the schools that you're connected with now, and, how big is networking? How important is networking for you and your as you prosper and continue to be successful?
Absolutely. Networking is, I am not a social. I can't. So they say the best extroverts are introverts, right? Introverts make the best extroverts in that, right? I'm not out and about socializing personally. It's just not what it just never was my thing. I absolutely could go out there and hold my own with any group of people. From the business standpoint, I think it's I think it's very important, networking. I could tell you, though, I formally don't do it. Mm-hmm. And so here's what I say is the best type of networking. The best type of networking is always working hard when you're working and always delivering the best product. And so when I first started Rosh Review, who would I reach out to? Who was my network at the time? Well, it was made up of the people who were training me in residency, because I busted my butt off in residency training, and they saw that I was someone who was diligent, focused, serious, mature, and caring and empathetic. And when I needed people to create content or review a product, that's who I turned to. I asked them, who can you find to help me in doing this? And one of my greatest economic and financial and business mentors was a father of one of my medical student classmates, in that he still runs a pretty large pharmaceutical distribution company out east. And I was always in awe of kind of how he did that. And I always would ask questions and learn about his life. And what he saw in me was that penchant for knowledge, was that, really wanting to understand a process. He saw that in me. And in fact, right, I never asked him for a dime or a thing, never asked him for anything other than to share his experience. Well, he ended up giving, now, it was an anonymous scholarship to me, but I knew who it came from. So in medical school, he set me up with an anonymous scholarship, which helped pay some of my loans down. And to this day, I call on him almost monthly he's like my business coach who, he always says to me, he's like, I'm so proud of what you've been able to do because I saw you from 20 years ago. Now, I could ask him, do you have someone who I could speak to about X, Y, Z? And he says, sure, right? And he could give me those contacts. That's networking to me, as opposed to going to, I think some of these organizations out there are exceptional. They're great. It's just not for everyone, right? Networking events, they're excellent, very well done, just not for everyone. And I'm in one of those categories where it just didn't work for me.
Makes sense.
It does. Adam, anybody who starts a business, obviously you got to worry about the bottom line. You're selling a product, so obviously you got to have clients. But when you were establishing Rosh Review, what role did establishing values play in getting your company up and running? And to piggyback off of that, how much have those values helped your organization grow over the years?
So, it goes all the way back to when someone asks you, why do you want to be a doctor? Right. And, the classic line is always, hey, I want to help people. And sure, on the surface, every doctor wants to help people for the most part. Being a physician is one of the most privileged positions in life. You get to, you touch people, right? Like you physically have to touch people, which carries its own, barrier. You are at people's side during their worst times of their life often, and sometimes their best. So the idea of knowing that responsibility was something that I was going to take on and then took on as a physician was really laid the foundation of what a business would look like in my life. And very early on, to reinforce that, to crystallize the idea of what culture and values would mean is, as I was starting off the business, there's a book by Patrick Lencioni called The Advantage. And in the, I believe it was the introduction, a line caught my attention. It said, the greatest competitive advantage a company could have is organizational health, and it's free. And I saw that and I said, oh, wait, you mean I don't have to spend thousands of dollars on marketing, to get a competitive advantage. I don't have to hire, $100,000 person to get an advantage. I could just focus on organizational health. And so I dug into that, and organizational health, really the start of that was building a company that was based on a strong culture and values. And so I came up with 3 values at that time, and they are immutable. They started when the company was founded. They're there today. And in fact, they're also end up being part of not only my life, but everyone who works for the company. And I suppose you may want to know what those values are. So we'll talk about those values. And people, a lot of businesses and companies, I think this is a good point, right? They'll put up a mission statement in a plaque on a wall somewhere, and they won't pay any attention to it, right? It's like something they have to, a box they check off to say, okay, here's our mission statement, or it's on their website or something like that. And a mission statement is great. Like, we will always deliver the best product, right? Like, okay, fine. But yeah, I feel like we could do better, right? And so when we develop our values, what we do is we state the value the same way someone would state in a mission statement, but then we just come up with something that people could truly grasp and understand in a certain way. And these aren't hanging up anywhere, but it's what we live every day, every decision we make on them. And they're so, so important. And the first one, we say, it's we pay attention to detail, and we all say we pay attention to detail like someone's life depends on it, right? So it's like a patient, right? And we remember that phrase, like we pay attention to detail, by the phrase, we remember that statement by the phrase, one space after all periods. So we're a content company, and when our authors or contributors would submit their content, we tell them we only want one space after a period. And if they submit something with 2 spaces, it gets sent back to them. It could be perfect everywhere else, but if they have 2 spaces, it gets sent back, because that's the level of detail we're looking for. The second value is it's creating human connections. Okay. A lot of corporate businesses, bigger businesses, right? You hear the stereotype of the corporate feel, and we didn't, you could still build human connections and be a large company, but so we use the phrase, it's the laying on of hands. Right. So as a physician or healthcare provider, it's the exam. And that exam of a patient is what takes you from just an observer and a listener to now directly being involved in that person's life. And that's our second core value. We want to build these human connections, and that it's such a privilege to work with the customer. It's a privilege to work with every employee. It's a privilege to work with you if you're an independent contractor working with us. And the third value is we all go one step further. And we remember that statement with the phrase, the 11th rep. So most people who do exercises, they have sets of 10 reps, and that's the norm, and that's fine. But we do 11. We do that one extra, the thing that no one's expecting, the thing that takes you from average to excellent, right? That accelerant. And that's what we do. We deliver that, whether it's an email communication, whether it's the grammar that's involved in an email from person to person in an organization has to be perfect, and we have to over deliver there. So those are the 3 core values. Everything we do in the company is filtered through those 3 core values. And I'll tell you what, it's created. We've not had one person in 9 years leave the company. People feel respected. They have dignity. They feel safe. And while from the business standpoint, certainly there may be, a little greater cost for that economically, and perhaps, economically, the return on positive attitude and health ultimately ends up making us a better company for sure.
Wow, man. Great. 3 core, man, great values. And you said something about respected, and which is important when you have people that you're leading. And I look at another one that jumps out to me is like appreciated. I tell leaders all the time, man, if your people that you're leading, if they feel that you respect them and they feel you appreciate them, man, they'll run through a brick wall for you, man. I'm telling you, you got them, and they'll have your back 100%. Now, another thing I'm sure that you guys, that people are looking for you as a physician is trust. I have to trust you, for me to take information from you, you take this medicine, or, whatever the case is, trust. How do you, what are some of the things that you do to gain people trust when they're dealing with you?
That's a great idea to talk about a little, because a lot of people I don't like the word expert. I hate the label expert. You're supposed to trust experts. Well, as someone with a science background, right, I know that there is chance and randomness and probabilities in every decision and everything that happens in life. There are no certainties in business world and in education and health. And so trust is very, very interesting, because we take a different stance on this from the marketing side of things. A lot of some of our people in our space will put pictures or try and say, the most trusted. You know what? We say this in our literature. We're not experts, right?
Really?
But we have the most experience. All right? Because we know that we don't know everything. We're not an expert, right? An expert has the idea of, they know everything about something. We just know that whatever it is, we will be by your side. This is, in our experience, what we've seen from thousands and thousands of interactions. And we're continually seeking the answer. We are continually seeking the truth in whatever it is that we're engaged in. And that truth may change based on different info. And we build trust really by honesty and humility, and knowing that we may lose a customer in the short term by being honest, but we always aim to play the long game, and we know they'll be back. And that's panned out over and over again. Companies that play the short game, the short win, the big check up front, some people choose to do that. We don't. I choose the long game, and the long game is built on trust. I don't send 20 marketing emails to people a month. In fact, I barely even send any emails a month because I want people to only receive information from me that they need at that moment that's valuable to them. And that's a lesson we could probably learn from all businesses, I think could benefit, I should say, from establishing. You need to ask yourself, what is trust, right? How do you deliver that trust day to day? So it's definitely something that is a highlight, I think, and something that I'm so proud of that we've been able to establish at Rosh Review.
You know, Adam, listening to you talk about those 3 core values, it's very apparent how much they mean to you on a personal level. And, you know, kind of to your previous point, you know, as some people who are in business, you know, they constantly got to maybe compromise some of their morals, because, you know, it's what's good for the business. It's how they got to survive. It's how they're going to pay the bills, how they're going to pay their employees. Has this always, you know, been kind of like just a part of who you are? You know, when you think about, you know, the fabric of who you are as a person, you know, going back to, you know, when you were a kid, or do you think it's kind of been something that's evolved over the years and some of the different experiences that you've had?
I could say that the greatest influence on that philosophy came during my residency training, where I trained at New York University, Bellevue Hospital. Bellevue is the first public hospital of New York, and it has a great tradition of caring for the poor, the sick, the those that don't have homes, those that don't have resources or little resources. And our chairman, Dr. Louis Goldfrank, one of the greatest teachers ever to grace this planet, instilled in every single one of his students and trainees the value of a human being, and to never, ever compromise your values. He battled hospital administration for decades because he felt that his system of medicine, of caring, was the most humane. And in medicine, money is right. Money drives medicine. And he was offered a professorship in this department and that department, and he always turned it down because what he wanted was his department of the department of emergency medicine, not necessarily his department, right? But he felt that emergency medicine was so critical as a safety net for the citizens of New York City. That he finally got that. And he said to me in an interview once, he said, if you're doing the right thing, if you know you're doing the right thing, eventually the other people will come around, and never compromise on those morals. So that's how we apply. That's what I apply in business. I would have the most discomfort if I'm having a conversation with an employee or a manager. I know they know I believe this. And so you have to live those values. If they see one bend of a value, you know they're going to see that. And so that's really what drives me. Yes, inside there's I know what I want to do, but like you just mentioned, there's all of these other influences. But I always want to be seen as the person who held my values in the hardest of times.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Hey, listen, man, you are preaching. And, you know, and I hope our listeners I hope they're really paying attention, because we got people that lead teams. They got people that's under them, and, you know, never compromise, even if it's not comfortable. Sometimes you're going to be leading people and you'll see things in them that they don't see in themselves, and you'll hold them accountable and you'll push them. And when you know it's the right thing to do, you cannot compromise, because I have some leaders that, okay, I'm just going to do it for you because I'm tired of you coming to me asking me the same question. Yeah. Instead of teaching them how to fish, man. That's right. You teach them how to fish, you don't have to feed them.
That's right. You have employees are watching what their leaders and bosses do. And if you want to create a well-run company, then every behavior and action you do as the leader will be mirrored by those who are employed doing different level tasks. And so if they see you doing the extra, if they see you not compromising then they are much more likely to act and behave and work in that same manner. You have to set high expectations, but you have to live those expectations. My chairman would walk around the emergency department and pick up bits of paper on the ground, and he would fix people's stretchers and bring them water, right? You have people who wouldn't dare do that as a chairman of a department. But you see him doing that, and then you're standing around and there's a piece of paper on the ground in front of you. What do you think you do? You pick it up. And now the entire emergency department is better. Everyone is now participating and aiming for excellence. That's what, you could create the saying, the slogan, aim for excellence, or you could just live it. And we know which one actually works and which one is just, nonsensical talk.
You're right.
Adam, we'd be remiss if we didn't ask you, just about your business, given the context of what we've all been living through these past several months, and the fact that your company is helping to train the next generation of doctors that are going to go out there and help people and help save people's lives, like so many physicians have done during this pandemic. When you sit down and really think about that, the fact that you are helping this next generation of physicians, and hopefully there's never another pandemic that any of us have to live through. But what does that mean to you? Seeing everything that we've all seen these last several months, and how crucial our doctors across the country and across the world have been.
There's not enough time to touch on all the amazing acts of courage that we've seen over the last few months. So I'll focus my comments on medicine and the medical community, because the emergency room was the front line. And when we train in emergency medicine, as someone who trained in New York, someone who was there for 9/11, we train for situations that people could barely fathom, right? We train for chemical attacks, biological attacks. We know what it's like to put on PPE before everyone knew what a PPE word meant. And after 9/11 in New York City, for example, there were instances where a gas line, let's say, would explode. This is after 9/11. I don't know if people remember what it was like, the tension, waiting for the next attack. And I remember this so clearly. Some people thought a bomb went off, and everyone who was in the vicinity of this explosion was covered in material. And we figured it was a biological or chemical bomb, and we had to get geared up and we had to go outside, and we knew we were at risk. And I think the people with COVID, it's the same thing. In the beginning, people didn't know whether they were going to live or die when they were caring for patients, but they did it. And it was their obligation. It was their moral contract with society. And the people who went out there and cared for those patients, and many did die. I don't think I know our country and our world is grateful for them, but I don't think people really recognize what it was like in those emergency rooms unless you were there. It was a war zone. It was no different than being in Iraq or Afghanistan when it came to dealing with death. It was everywhere. And so the courage that the nurses, the administrators, every healthcare professional who stayed in that hospital and cared for patients is each one of them played an incredible role and act of courage. What little we could do as a company was to provide them with free resources. We've been doing that since very early on. We did not want anyone to have to worry about a delay in a certification or licensing exam, about losing a subscription. We did not want training programs to be disrupted in their resources. We wanted a seamless, stressless decision for them. And we opened up our entire company for anyone in the health professions who needed educational content and to continue to learn through the pandemic. And so that's what we did. That was our contribution at the time. Now we're at a place where it's more manageable. There's less chaos. There's more order. People are moving back to, being able to make better decisions, more informed decisions right now. And so we helped them bridge that time period. And now here we are today.
Man, you guys, and kudos to you, man. I applaud you guys for stepping up to the plate. Providing resources in a time of need, and it's a teaching lesson in that as well, because even our leaders and that's listening to this podcast, you guys are going to lead people, and it's going to be inconvenient at time, and it's not going to go your way, and that's when you step up. That's when you see real leaders. That's when you earn your stripes, not when it's convenient, not when everything is going great. And a lot of people, and shame on them, use this pandemic to try to gain for money. And, shame on them. That's a whole nother conversation. I don't even want to get into that. But, man, kudos to you guys for stepping up. And leaders that's listening to this, when it's not convenient, that's when you step up. As a leader, that's when you earn your stripes. So, Adam, I appreciate you, applaud you guys first of all, but thanks for sharing that story, because I think that's going to be very helpful to a lot of people.
Thank you. One of the kind of sayings that always reverberates in my mind is adversity doesn't build character, it reveals character. And that's true in every part of my life. When I observed adversity, those that rise, those who step up, they always were going to step up, right? It wasn't the adversity that made them, that built it in them. It's who they are as a person. Well said. And probably a good note to end on. It was a fascinating conversation. Just listening to your story of how you built your business and how you approach business. It's certainly no surprise to us that you're having as much success as you are. So we really appreciate you sharing that with us, Adam, and keep up the good work. And we know that you'll follow your heart in all of your ventures, and that always leads you to good things. So thanks again. We really appreciate you taking the time. Well, Mateen and Justin, I'm grateful for the invitation, grateful to share my time and to just give some insight, small insight into my life for your audience. So thank you. To make sure you never miss an episode of Power Forward, subscribe wherever you find your podcasts and leave us a review. And look for another new episode coming your way 2 weeks from now, featuring more inspirational stories of success. I'm Justin White. We'll see you next time on Power Forward.